Carlson. Tonight, our Tech Tyranny edition. Multi-billion-dollar companies in Silicon Valley are waging, in effect, a war on your privacy, your culture, your freedom of speech. They are the portal through which all human information flows, and they have their thumb on the scale. The results of the searches you conduct online, they control those. Your phone, they own it, in effect. They track you everywhere you go, even when the phone is off. They collect intimate information on you. They sell it to advertisers for a profit. They give you no details about this. These companies are politically radical. They are funding the activism that's changing our country right now. There's nothing that you can do to check their power. Congress should be doing that, but they're not. Increasingly, these countries are using their power and influence to shape the world around us. Some of these companies are bigger than the economies of entire nations. This show is an examination of those companies and the effects they have on our lives, our country, and our politics. The scale of their reach is enormous, and it is finally drawing the attention of policymakers, including the president.
I think that Google and Facebook and Twitter, I think they treat conservatives and Republicans very unfairly. And I think it's a very serious problem because they're really trying to silence a very large part of this country. And those people don't want to be silenced. It's not right. It's not fair. It may not be legal.
Fox News headlines anchor Brett Larson has been on the tech beat for us for quite some time, and he's going to set the table for us tonight. Brett?
All right, Tucker. Yeah, earlier this week, the president sent out a tweet in which he said, in part, quote, Google search results for Trump news shows only the viewing reporting of fake news media. In other words, they have it rigged for me and others so that almost all stories and news is bad. Now, Google was quick to respond to the claim in a statement saying, in part, quote, search is not used to set a political agenda, and we don't bias our results toward any political ideology. As for how Google search works, that is a closely guarded secret. Algorithms used by online sites, including Google, Twitter, and Facebook, are protected, like the recipe for Coca-Cola. Why? Well, if sites knew exactly how the search site worked, it would be easier to rig their web content to reach a larger audience. But a few things are known about how Google search works. Google is scanning the web for new pages around the clock, and they're looking for a variety of things to ensure that the right pages are delivered to the right people. They check to see that a site is mobile friendly, so it renders properly on your smartphone if you're on the go. They also check to make sure the content is original and not just some plagiarized information with a bunch of ads slapped around it. But where you go online also affects your search results. As we know, and we have reported here before, Google keeps track of virtually everything you do, mainly to ensure they show you the right ads. We'll have more on our investigation later this hour. But in this case, it's also to ensure you're getting the right search results. As for news search, it's a little different. As we know, news is happening 24 hours a day, but a reliable source is needed for a news story. A site that creates more content, that is optimized for search, will likely get a higher ranking, but also a site that gets click-through from the results. So if, for example, you search for California wildfires, and in the results, more people are going to our Fox affiliate, KTVU, their site, they will move higher in the rankings. Now, this is where the mainstream media has an advantage, though, as they present more middle-of-the-road news without leaning to the left or to the right, so they'll have a larger reach within those results. Tucker?
Depending upon who defines what middle of the road is.
Yeah.
Brett, thank you very much. We're going to see you later this hour.
Yes.
So you just heard what Google says it does. The question is, can we trust them? That is the central question. Here's some background on the company. Google just removed its famous catchphrase, "Don't be evil," from its corporate code of conduct earlier this year. It was a symbolic change, but also maybe ominous for the most powerful company in human history. Google's market cap is now about $860 billion. That's more than the gross domestic product of almost every country in the world. 170 countries have smaller GDPs than Google. The Federal Trade Commission prepared an antitrust case against the tech giant a few years ago, but the Obama Justice Department didn't take it. Google now controls roughly 90% of the search engine market, 65% of the internet browser market. It controls 85% of the mobile operating systems on the phones in our pockets right now. Google controls an outsized portion of the online ad market, which means they also control the companies that rely on online advertising. That is, every single digital news company in the United States. Google has an army of lobbyists in Washington. It bankrolls politicians in both parties. It contributes to virtually every major think tank in Washington, regardless of ideologies, including, hilariously, a think tank dedicated to fighting monopolies. At least one of those think tanks has fired a staff for being critical of Google. So the question is, and it may be rhetorical, is Google too powerful to regulate? Scott Cleland is the author of Search and Destroy Why You Can't Trust Google Inc. He joins us now. So Scott, very quickly on the search question, that seems like one of the most basic questions. All of our information comes through this tiny little portal. Google says, trust us. We're not putting our thumb on the scale. Can we?
No, we can't, because it's blanket trust. It's blind trust, because no one does really know what goes on there. The problem is when you put all of access of supply and demand to access all the world's information through one black box. One thing that we have no transparency to, we don't understand, and let's not forget, the whole purpose of it is to rank. So it is to choose what is best. They have said for years it's algorithmic, so if it's algorithmic, it must be okay. Well, an algorithm is just a computer program that people decided what the biases would be.
Right.
They're purposeful biases. But the problem of Google is the fact that we have concentrated all that power in one company, because it's the most harmful monopoly you can imagine. Information is power. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. In a constitutional republic, in a free market, the free flow of information and the competition of ideas are paramount and central. And when you go through one black box and say that is all occurring only here, and there's one person that basically sets what the ideology and the approach is going to be, and it's Larry Page, and then that filters through, you have, it's a very scary situation. You want a competition for ideas. You want a competition for sources. He has created an unbelievably innovative and great search engine. No criticism there in the sense of its capability. But how the government, and I've for 10 years been trying to prevent this monopoly, and the government screwed up over time and time again in allowing Google to become this
monopoly. That's for sure. So quickly, news reports have reported that Google is working to devise a search engine that would help the fascist government of China repress its own people. So given that we believe we know that they are willing to suppress information on behalf of a government to achieve repressive political ends, why should we trust them not to do that to us?
Well, we shouldn't. And my goodness, this is as Orwellian as it comes, because when that was brought up, and when somebody, who we know criticized Google for biasing its search, the President of the United States, they had their answer that says, we never make our search results based on a political ideology. Well, they are committing to do it for China, for the entire country, soup to nuts, for everything. They're going to bow down to the Chinese ideology.
Yeah, not a big deal. A country that executes political prisoners and sells their organs. It seems like just the kind of people you'd want, to help remain in power.
But how they can say that with a straight face, and then saying that they're not bending their will to ideology, they do it all around the world.
Well, they're lying. Scott, you have been fighting a lonely crusade on behalf of this idea, and we're obviously rooting for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So European regulators fined Google billions after they accused the company of abusing its power and engaging in anti-competitive practices. American regulators, meanwhile, are nowhere to be found. Why is that exactly? Luther Lowe is the Senior Vice President of Public Policy for Yelp, and he joins us now. And Luther, thanks for coming. And I'm always particularly happy to talk to you since you're right in the middle of this world. You work for a big tech company. There's a really simple question. Google has a monopoly. Nobody debates that. Monopolies are supposed to be banned by U.S. law. We have a whole Congress with 535 people in it designed to protect us from monopolies, but they're not. Why?
Well, I think there's political capture going on, and I think if you have a search engine that is clearly guilty of self-serving bias, and I'm not talking about the type of self-serving bias that President Trump tweeted about earlier this week. I'm talking about demonstrable, easy-to-prove bias in the most common area of what we do on Google, which is local search. This should be a slam dunk. We should be able to show consumer harm, and in fact, we have done so. When a mom does a search for a pediatrician in Salt Lake City, she is basically trusting Google to match her with the best information from across the web. that has been the implicit promise to Google's users throughout its growth. But what's happened is that Google has swapped out that information and put their own inferior information there. And so this creates consumer harm, and it gets back to your question about monopoly. If you can show that consumer harm, then you can easily prosecute an antitrust case. And this is why I think we should focus on the business conduct of Google as it relates to search.
Well, I agree completely, but the monopoly is prima facie, and so is the harm. You work in Washington on this issue. Doubtless you've spoken to members of Congress, and you've told them what they already know. This is company's too powerful, it has a monopoly, it's hurting consumers. How do they respond?
I mean, I think we're starting to see the tide turn, and I was really heartened to see, for example, Senator Hatch's letter yesterday to the chairman of the Federal Trade Commission, where he basically said, listen, you know, we closed the last investigation in 2013. One expects that when you close an antitrust investigation, the market is going to be less calcified, that there are going to be, you know, the company in question is going to be less entrenched, there's going to be more startups and so forth. But we're seeing the opposite. And so maybe we should take another look at this. And so I think we're beginning to see the tide turn.
Good for Senator Hatch, but I think there are 99 other guys in the same chamber. Where are they? What would be the justification quickly for not acting? I don't understand.
Well, the FTC, we have a completely new slate of FTC commissioners. They're running public hearings now to collect information, and I'm cautiously optimistic that we're going to re-examine a lot of these questions, as we should.
Google is not an American company. It's a multinational. This is a foreign threat to our country. That's my view. I think it's a national security threat. Thank you for the work you've done.
Thank you, sir.
Free online services aren't actually free. You may have known that. They come at a cost. You're paying that cost in privacy. We've got details ahead.